This is a video presentation of Bible Survey, Unit number 14, entitled Divided Monarchy. For this unit, the student should read pages 262 through 274 and 296 through 298 in the text Erdman's Handbook to the Bible, and in the Bible itself, 1 Kings chapter 12 through 2 Kings chapter 8, and 2 Chronicles chapters 10 through 20. The student should be able to answer questions on the causes for division of the kingdom, characteristics of the two kingdoms, the ministry of Elijah and its purpose, the sin of Jeroboam, and Elisha, his ministry, and the spirit of Elijah. And now here's today's speaker, Dr. Roy Hayden.
Some indication was already given in the last lecture of the breakdown of the kingdom over which David and Solomon reigned. This is even more forcefully brought out when the son of Solomon, Rehoboam, went to Shechem to be crowned king. You may recall that when David became king, he first entered into a contract with the southern tribe of Judah, and then 7 years later he entered into a contract with the northern tribes. This is described in 2 Samuel 5:3. So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord. And they anointed David king over Israel. This covenant specified the rights and privileges of the king, but also his limitations and responsibility. No such covenant seemed to be made at the time of Solomon. Now, however, Rehoboam was confronted by the people of Israel. Jeroboam also, who had fled earlier to Egypt to escape from Solomon, returned to act as spokesman for the people. The main grievance of the people was the oppressive service of Solomon. They said, "Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke upon us, and we will serve you." Rehoboam wanted 3 days to consider their request. He consulted with the old men who had counseled Solomon, and they said he should listen to the people. He also consulted with the young men who grew up with him. They suggested a get-tough policy. Unfortunately, he listened to the young men. On the 3rd day, the people returned, and Rehoboam gave them this answer: "My little finger is thicker than my father's loins. And now, whereas my father laid upon you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father chastened you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions." The scorpion is a type of whip. The people of Israel immediately renounced their relationship with the house of David. They elected Jeroboam as their king. Jeroboam had already been designated king by the prophet Ahijah while Solomon was still alive. It was at that time that Ahijah took a new garment and tore it into 12 pieces. He told Jeroboam to take 10 pieces. "For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, Behold, I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and will give you 10 tribes. But he shall have 1 tribe, for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, because he has forsaken me, and worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Milcom, the god of the Ammonites, and has not walked in my ways, doing what is right in my sight, and keeping my statutes and my ordinances, as David his father did. Yet to his son I will give 1 tribe, that David my servant may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city where I have chosen to put my name. And I will take you, and you shall reign over all that your soul desires, and you shall be king over Israel. And if you will hearken to all that I command you, and will walk in my ways, and do what is right in my eyes by keeping my statutes and my commandments, as David my servant did, I will be with you, and will build you a sure house, as I built for David, and I will give Israel to you. Note that there are several important points made in this conversation. The reason God has caused a division in the kingdom is the sin of Solomon. Just as a king entered into a covenant with the people, Solomon also had a covenant obligation to Yahweh. That covenant was even more important. Solomon started out well, but the foreign influence was too great for him. His wives turned his heart away from God. God now tore the kingdom from Solomon. He didn't do it during the reign of Solomon for David's sake, but immediately after the death of Solomon, he did it. Another important point is that the entire kingdom will not be taken away. One tribe, or really two tribes, but Simeon had been assimilated into Judah for all practical purposes, so one tribe will be left to the family of David. Jerusalem also was left in the hands of the line of David. After all, it was a private property of David. The significant factor here is that Jerusalem is described as the place where God had chosen to put his name. This means that every act or deed done by one of the kings of Israel to the north is judged on the basis of Jerusalem as the proper place to worship. This will become more prominent as we go along, but the student needs to keep this in mind as the text is read. It is relevant, too, to the next point. And the third significant point is that at the time Jeroboam was commissioned to be king of the Northern Federation, he was also given covenant stipulations by God. If you will hearken to all that I command you, then. Unfortunately, the Northern Kingdom never got off the ground in its spiritual relationship with Yahweh. Immediately after the split, two shrines were established at Bethel in the south, shown here with the remains of a Byzantine church, and at Dan in the north, seen in this picture. Jeroboam set up golden calves at both places. Whether he actually meant these calves to be images of Yahweh, or as merely the seat on which God sat, as the ark was the place for the presence of God in the temple, is not clear. But in any case, it is difficult to have any kind of image and not have the image itself become the center of worship. Since the biblical material comes from the southern kingdom, for the most part, we have a bias account also. If Jerusalem was the place where God had chosen to place his name, then no other place would be legitimate. On the other hand, because Yahweh chose to place his name at Jerusalem does not rule out the possibility that other places could and might be chosen for that same purpose. The making of the golden calves and the introduction of idolatry is the sin of Jeroboam. The prophets constantly referred to it, and every dynasty in the north followed his practice. There was a great difference between the two kingdoms in many ways. Geographically, the northern kingdom of Israel was in contact with the outside world, with the Phoenicians along the Mediterranean coast and with Syria to the northwest. The valley of Jezreel and the passes through the Carmel range were part of an international route which connected Egypt to the south with the great powers of Mesopotamia to the north. Contact with more advanced neighbors meant a more rapid development for Israel. But at the same time, this open contact was a threat politically and religiously. Judah, on the other hand, was more isolated. Most of the cities were in the hill country or areas away from the main routes for travel. Anyone who traveled through Judah did so because they wanted to be in Judah, not because they were on their way elsewhere. Judah did not develop as rapidly politically, and because of the temple at Jerusalem, Judah was more conservative religiously. Politically, the two kingdoms were different. Both had 19 kings, but Israel had 9 different dynasties, and Judah only one. This meant that in the 200-year history of Israel, There were frequent changes in dynasties. Some lasted for many years, others only for days or months. Assassinations were frequent in the north, but with the exception of Athaliah, who killed all her grandchildren and set herself on the throne of Judah, no king was killed by another who wanted to take his place. Some were killed by the people, but a son of the murdered king was placed on the throne. I should clarify that Athaliah missed one of her grandchildren, the baby Joash, saved by his aunt Jehoshaphat. Religiously, the kingdoms also differed. According to the author of the biblical material, no king in Israel ever did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Some of them carried out commissions from Yahweh, such as Jehu, when the family of Ahab was annihilated, but with the shrines at Bethel and Dan, most kings were automatically branded as idolaters. In Judah, there were good kings and bad kings. A king may not be judged on the basis of his accomplishment as a king, but on his relationship with God. Those who were pro-Yahweh were good kings. Those who took less interest in the worship of God were bad kings. An interesting point was made about the son of Jeroboam. Abijah, the son of Jeroboam, fell sick. Jeroboam told his wife to disguise herself and go to the prophet Ahijah at Shiloh to see what was going to happen to the child. This scene shows all that remains of Shiloh. Ahijah was blind, but God told him that the wife of Jeroboam was coming. The message he delivered was not merely concerning the child, since this seems to be only the method God used to make his word known. The message was, "Because I exalted you from among the people, and made you leader over my people Israel, and tore the kingdom away from the house of David and gave it to you, and yet you have not been like my servant David, who kept my commandments and followed me with all his heart, doing only that which was right in my eyes, but you have done evil above all that were before you, and have gone and made for yourself other gods, and molten images, provoking me to anger, and have cast me behind your back. Therefore, behold, I will bring evil upon the house of Jeroboam, and will cut off from Jeroboam every male, both bond and free, in Israel, and will utterly consume the house of Jeroboam as a man burns up dung until it is all gone. Anyone belonging to Jeroboam who dies in a city, the dogs shall eat, and anyone who dies in the open country, the birds of the air shall eat, for the Lord has spoken it." You'll find that in 1 Kings 14, verses 7 through 11. This is a long quote, but it is important. This same judgment is given for most of the dynasties in the north. Each king had the opportunity to turn the hearts of the people to Yahweh, but they all failed. As a result, judgment came. Now the point concerning Abijah, the son of Jeroboam. His mother was informed that as soon as she returned home, the child would die. He would be buried, and all Israel would mourn for him. Of all the family of Jeroboam, he is the only one who would have a respectable burial, because in him there is found something pleasing to the Lord, the God of Israel, in the house of Jeroboam. There are many details in the narrative concerning the kings. The student should consistently consult the chart on pages 284 of the text for the chronological order of the kings, and the article Unraveling the Chronology of the Kings, pages 269 to 271. It would be useful to you at this time. However, for our purpose, these details will be omitted in the lecture, and the larger themes will be stressed. Enough has already been said to give some idea of the religious condition of the northern kingdom of Israel. The religious situation reached a crisis in the days of Ahab. Omri had begun the fourth dynasty in Israel. He purchased the hill of Samaria and built a new capital for the northern kingdom there. Excavations revealed that the quality of the building was excellent. Many pieces of ivory found at Samaria and at the Assyrian palaces testify to the biblical description that Omri built a house of ivory at Samaria. Of course, this means that the ivory served merely as inlay in wall panels and in furniture, but it is a good indication of the wealth of the northern kingdom. Omri entered into an alliance with Ithbaal, the king of Sidon. He married his son Ahab to Jezebel, the daughter of Ithbaal. Not only did Ahab get Jezebel, but he also got a fanatical follower of Baal. The scripture says, 1 Kings 16:31 through 33, "And as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, he took for wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ithbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria, and Ahab made an Asherah. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him." Elijah, one of the greatest prophets of God, arose at this time to confront Ahab and the nation of Israel. Elijah predicted a drought for Israel with no moisture at all until he said so. 3 years later, God told Elijah to show himself to Ahab and promise rain. Conditions had been critical in Israel. Not only was Israel in a drought physically, she was in a worse drought spiritually. Jezebel had cut off the prophets of Yahweh. Obadiah, who was over the household of Ahab, secretly took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave and fed them with bread and water. Now this same Obadiah had been told by Ahab, "Go through the land to all the springs of water and to all the valleys. Perhaps we may find grass and save the horses and mules alive, and not lose some of the animals." While Obadiah was looking for water, he met Elijah. Elijah wanted Obadiah to tell Ahab that Elijah was there. The reply of Obadiah indicates that Ahab had been looking everywhere for Elijah for the purpose of putting him to death. Obadiah said, "There is no nation or kingdom, whether my Lord has not sent to seek you." And when they would say, "He is not here," he would take an oath of the kingdom or nation that they had not found you. Obadiah was afraid that when he told Ahab that Elijah was there, the Spirit of the Lord would catch Elijah up and he would not be there. But Elijah and Ahab met. Each accused the other of being the troubler of Israel. Elijah told Ahab to assemble the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah on Mount Carmel. A contest was held to determine who was really God. Both parties built altars. Each had a bull for a sacrifice. But the true God was to answer by fire that would consume the bull. The prophets of Baal and Asherah went first. From morning till noon they called on Baal, but there was no voice, no one answered. Elijah mocked the prophets by describing their God. Perhaps he is just playing around. Maybe he had to go to the restroom. He could be on a journey, or he might even be asleep. The prophets continued to shout and cut themselves with swords and lances. By the time of the evening offering, nothing had happened. Baal had not answered. Elijah then repaired the altar of Yahweh, made a trench around the altar, put the wood in place, and cut up the bull and put it on the wood. Then, after the trench had been filled with water, he prayed to God. The prayer identified the God of Israel by his historical connection with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This same God had called Elijah as his servant. Now Elijah wanted God to answer, that this people may know that thou, O Lord, art God, and that thou hast turned their hearts back. The fire fell, the offering, the wood, the stones, and the water were all consumed. The desired result was achieved. The people acknowledged Yahweh as God. Elijah commanded that the prophets of Baal be seized. He brought them down to the brook Kishon and killed them there. Sometimes the question is asked, where did Elijah get all the water if there had been no rain for 3 years? A geological examination of the land of Israel reveals that the country is made up of layers of material. One of these layers is an impervious limestone. Water falling on the surface gradually seeps down to this layer and then runs along the layer until it issues forth in springs. Some of this water takes as long as 5 years to make its way down. Even though no rain falls, the springs may have abundant water. However, because of this delayed process, springs may be low even though the previous year had been very wet. Rain came before Ahab could make it back to Jezreel. Ahab reported to Jezebel, and Jezebel sent a message to Elijah and threatened his life. Elijah, who could face 850 prophets in a life and death struggle, became afraid and fled. The scene is humorous, if it were not so sad. He went a day's journey into the wilderness and sat down under a broom tree. This is that traditional tree, although this was taken in Sinai. Elijah wanted to die. He is provided food by an angel, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and nights until he came to Horeb, the Mount of God. Elijah entered a cave and stayed there. God asked, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah gave God a sad story about the conditions in Israel and claimed he was the only one left who had not forsaken the covenant, and they were even looking for him to kill him. God told him to stand on the mount. There was a great wind, an earthquake, and a fire, but God was not in any of them. Then came a small, still voice, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah repeated his sad song. God then told him to return to the wilderness of Damascus and do 3 things. 1, anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. 2, anoint Jehu the son of Nimshi to be king over Israel. And 3, anoint Elisha the son of Shaphat to be prophet in his place. God also informed Elijah that there were 7,000 persons in Israel who had not bowed down to Baal or kissed him. Israel and Syria were constantly at war. Ahab defeated the Syrians and captured Ben-Hadad, their king. However, he let him go and even made a covenant with him. A prophet, using an object lesson which involved having himself wounded, declared to Ahab, "Thus says the Lord, because you have let go out of your hand the man whom I had devoted to destruction, therefore your life shall go for his life, and your people for his people." A further detail on the death of Ahab was given by Elijah when he confronted Ahab after Jezebel had secured the death of Naboth so that Ahab could have the vineyard of Naboth. Elijah told Ahab, "In the place where dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, shall dogs lick your own blood." Ahab was killed in battle with the Syrians, just as another prophet, Micaiah, had prophesied. Ahab was struck by an arrow, and the blood of the wound flowed into the bottom of the chariot. The king was buried in Samaria, but his chariot was washed by the pool of Samaria, and the dogs licked up his blood. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elisha asked to inherit a double share of the spirit of Elijah. A double share is another way of saying that he wanted to be the heir and inherit the spirit of Elijah. Often this is interpreted to mean that Elisha received twice the spirit that Elijah had. All the miracles are counted, and Elisha is seen to have twice as many. But miracles are not significant. The confrontation of the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel is greater than most of Elisha's miracles put together. And a person cannot give more than he himself possesses. Elisha wanted the same spirit that Elijah had, and that is what he received. Elisha did perform many miracles. Note that only these two prophets and Moses have been credited with miracles. The only other period when miracles will be in evidence in the Old Testament is in the book of Daniel. They serve a purpose. They confirm the message of the prophets. They are not ends in themselves. A later lecture will deal specifically with miracles. In this lecture, we have taken a look at the causes for the division of the kingdom, some of the characteristics of the two kingdoms, the sin of Jeroboam and of all the other northern kings, the ministry of Elijah and its purpose, and Elisha and his inheritance of the spirit of Elijah. Details of the reigns of individual kings have been left for your own reading and study.
This has been a video presentation of Bible Survey, Unit number 14, entitled Divided Monarchy. This program has been produced by the Department of Educational Media of Oral Roberts University.